Thank you, Amit, and thank you for putting together such a wonderful diversity of speakers. I know it's already 9 hours into the session, so I don't know how much capacity you have to absorb more stuff. But I had a very simple idea, and that's all I wanted to share with you. It's not even in my area of expertise. It's mainly something that I experienced over the last few years dealing with Indian higher education systems. So let me ask a quick question. How many of you were inspired at some point in your life by a professor in terms of your life choices or career choices? Yeah, I see at least a few hands. So everyone should have that opportunity, I think. And in my case, I was just finishing up my MBA at IIM Calcutta, and I happened to run into Professor Phil Kotler, who had come to give a talk. And I just was chatting with him for a little bit, and he said, "Why don't you apply to a PhD? You seem to have all the background." And that was never something that I ever thought of, but that one little interaction for a few minutes, you know, changed my life. And I went to Kellogg to do a PhD, not with him, but I did it there. So anyway, so this kind of experience is something that we all want. Somebody to inspire us, somebody to make us think higher than we would do otherwise. And this needs quality faculty, quality people in the educational system. So how did I get into this? Penn State put together a committee and put me as a chair to find how Penn State could engage strategically with India. And the idea was very simple. They said many problems are global in scale: poverty, financial systems, climate conditions. So to address those problems in a global way, you need a global network of researchers, and Penn State doesn't have that. So we need to build connections in China, in India, and so on. And I was put in charge of trying to figure out the strategic basis for doing it. And that got me engaged with the Indian higher education system, with the Ministry of HRD. I met a lot of people, including Amit, through this process, with MDI, IIM Bangalore, IIT Kanpur, Tata Institute, Indian Institute of Science, and many others. So I met a lot of people. And I've also initiated some processes, including one that's called the Academy for Academic Leadership. This is to help train faculty, and particularly deans, vice chancellors, in modern methods of academic administration. All of that have taken hold, and they're moving forward. And in this process, when I came across faculty, I came away with a couple of impressions. One, there were some very smart people having faculty positions in India, but not enough of them. And they were all stymied by a very bureaucratic type of organization. And this made me, it puzzled me, and I've been giving some thought to it, which is what I want to share with you today. Let me see. Oops. I gave that background. In terms of where we come from, oops, I don't know, some of the slides have, it's not showing the whole thing. So Penn State is one of the largest universities in the US. We have the second highest operating budget for any university in the country. So we are large scale, 96,000 students compared to, let's say, 20,000 at Harvard. So we have to combine quantity and quality at the same time. And this is something that Penn State has done over the last 150 years and continues to do this. And this is sort of the problem I saw in India as well. Everybody was talking about quantity, gross enrollment ratio, school attainment, equity, access. Nobody mentioned quality at any time in any of my discussions. Why is that not important? How do we look at education simply as meeting some numbers, not inspiring the next generation of in our labor force, in making India more innovative? So I brought some of that ideas, and I've discussed with people here. So very broadly, university has sort of four things that it should do, I think. One is knowledge generation. That's knowledge for the future. And this means knowledge for the whole world, not just for India. And India has not been doing particularly well at that. A recent study actually commissioned by the HRD, found that 3.5% of the articles that were written in 2010 were from Indian researchers. 11% was from China, and US is more than 30% or so. But when you take the top 1% journals, Indian presence was like 0.54%. Okay. So we are not present in adequate number. We are not in the knowledge generation business. But today's top universities have to be. And that's why in some of the statistics you have seen, like there's no Indian university in the top 200 because they're not in the business of knowledge generation. What we are doing well is knowledge dissemination. That's the middle part, that's teaching. And India has produced a lot of good teaching schools, including, I would say, IIT, where I did go in 35 years ago. I think our previous minister got into trouble saying that IIT succeeded because of its students, not because of its faculty, but I think that there is some truth to that. So we are knowledge dissemination. Finally, the third thing is knowledge credentialing or branding, and that's to some extent useful for employers. So if you can screen people and say somebody who went to Harvard or to IITs or whatever, they'll be good students, that serves some good purpose. And finally, universities are getting into knowledge monetization because funding is being cut everywhere, and the way universities can make more revenue is to try to translate some of the research and other things that they produce. So that's the fourth one. So quality is required in all four. And I'm not going to talk only about teaching quality, which is sometimes what people mention. I don't know how to operate this. Oops, it went to the last slide. Okay, very broadly, I would say quality is a very difficult thing to define, but just take some notion of quality that you have in mind. So we need quality of students, quality of faculty, and quality of the educational experience to make it a completely quality outcome. Quality of students, I have no doubt, because Indian students are very bright. I've met a lot of them, and I continue to be amazed at the high quality of students we have who often end up not getting the high quality education. Then we have quality of faculty, which I'll talk about, and the quality of the magic that happens when good quality students interact with good quality faculty. Now, one of my colleagues, Bob Hendrickson, who's in our education department, has been engaged with the Ministry of HRD and so on, trying to help with some policy decisions. And he's new to India and is studying the Indian educational system. So I asked him what was his view of the Indian educational system. He said, the way I would put it is India has A students taught by B faculty working for an F administration. Okay? And I think that sort of captures very well how we operate. There's a lot of the bureaucratic processes imposed from the top. That's what kills some of the last part. I'm not going to talk about any of those today. So a top university is really a unique aggregator of talent. That's what it is at the end of the day. And I attended a FICCI meeting 3-4 years ago where one of the speakers said, India is so vast, we have so many talented people. If we set our mind to it, we can create 10 Harvards in 10 years. Okay? That's not possible. It's not possible for Harvard to create another Harvard, okay, outside of where they are, because it's a unique aggregation of talent. And it's that quality of faculty that Harvard has that makes it so unique. So what is the problem in getting better faculty? One, you cannot simply produce new faculty overnight. Some of the numbers thrown about in India are amazing. Apparently, we need 300,000 new faculty members for all the new colleges and universities being set up. If you think about it, to make a faculty member go through a, say, PhD process of 4 years of individualized mentoring, that's a lot of time. It's like making a baby. No matter what you do, it's going to take 9 months. This is going to take 4 years. It may take 5 years. And after that, people have to build expertise. So production of faculty is not scalable. And that has created now a big global market for faculty talent. Because universities are opening all over the world, including India. And we are now, even when we recruit in the US, we suddenly are now competing with Hong Kong University and PKU University and so on, which we never did 5 years ago. So those are universities that are paying global salaries and trying to attract absolutely the top faculty for their universities. Third, quality is not additive, which means that you cannot buy 2 faculty members and try to replicate a high quality faculty member. Okay. You cannot get Sunil Gavaskar by putting 5 average batters. Okay. That's the problem. And so when you go into that, it becomes expensive. As the quality adds up, the prices add up disproportionately. Finally, and this is the good thing, there's a multiplier effect of high quality faculty. And some people have done research and said it's from 3 to 5, the multiplier value. Some faculty, for example, are consistently good in teaching. Why, we don't know, but they are good. And for example, when Bush came up with the No Child Left Behind Act, they also put into place a lot of performance metrics for testing faculty. And there were some faculty who consistently, in 1 year academic year, produced students who learned the equivalent of 1.5 years. Okay. And many who only could get a quarter year or a half year. And they did it consistently every year. So there is some value to the quality model here. So what you lose in having to pay high price, maybe you will gain by having a multiplier effect. So if it costs 3 times more, but somebody gives 3 times the effect, that sort of evens out. So what some suggestions? I think we have to not think about it in a very gradual sense. We have to think about it, how to jumpstart this process. And one of the things we could do is something that China has done very effectively, I think. They created something called a 1,000 Talent Program. This was way back in 1992. And they offered high salaries to absolutely top faculty in the US and in Europe to try to get them to go back to China. Okay? And some of them did. They were not just Chinese. There were 2 of my American colleagues went, okay, because they saw the opportunity to do something different. And this is costly, okay, but it brings really top talent, because the bottleneck, I really think, is at the top. If you create high quality faculty at the top, they will raise everybody, because they will start asking tough questions, they'll set high standards, they will get into apex bodies, they will help create curricula, they can do all kinds of things. So their multiplier effect would be very high. So India has something called a National Professor Program. Has anyone heard of that? Okay, there are 16 people that the government of India has given that to. It's extremely small. There are people like Romila Thapar, Andre Bette, few people like that. That's it. Why only 16? You know, we should be having 1,000 national professors, because we have that much need. And we should be looking at faculty in many different areas, not just in history, politics, and areas like that. So that's one suggestion. When I made this suggestion to people in the HRD, they said, oh, this won't work. You cannot pay more for somebody in the faculty than the Prime Minister of India. There'll be a lot of resentment. There will be all kinds of problems. People will have an inquiry on this process, delay things, etc. So maybe that's true, but again, to solve this problem, we have to do something that's dramatically different than what we've been thinking. If you don't do the first one, there is something called the Summer Visitor Program. That again, China has tried with some success. So you can bring faculty for 2 months from who are very best in any part of the world to come and be a guest of the Indian government in various educational institutions. And they build connections, they build faculty relationships and collaborations. The third one is very interesting, because when I was invited to a congregation of vice chancellors of Indian universities, I met about 300 of them. I have to say I was dismayed at the quality of these people who are running Indian universities. Okay, I don't know how else to tell you. Maybe there are 50 of them that seem reasonable, but the other 250 were political hacks. They didn't think of education as some calling or anything like that. They were looking at it as some political job or something like that. So maybe that's another opportunity to get administrators from abroad who have worked in different systems to come and make changes. And China has done this very effectively. They in fact stole one of my colleagues just recently, the dean of our law school, to the Peking University Translational Law School. They hired the former president of Cornell at one time. And so they're bringing in these kind of people because they know the entrenched Chinese system is not going to change on its own, no matter what they do, unless they bring in some very, very fresh people with very little that they have to sort of kowtow to anybody in the country. And I think that's another one. I think I may be running out of time, but let me finish very quickly. High levels of pay and high talent people have to be evaluated at a higher level. And I think that's one other problem. When I asked people, how do you evaluate a faculty? It was all sort of very informal process, at least in what they were described to me in many of the central universities. So one way to approach this is to create systematic processes for evaluation. I've given some guidelines in one of the papers that in the paper that you see in the Thinkers magazine. And to create this on a national basis, today there are online systems for faculty evaluation, which, for example, our university uses, many others use, which give a very quick snapshot to anybody looking at what does this faculty member done in the last year in terms of teaching, in terms of research, in terms of broader impact. And it's all easy to access that kind of information, and you should be using that to create a more effective evaluation system. Finally, I think industry can play a bigger role. I know that, for example, the Indian government hired Raghuram Rajan as the governor of Reserve Bank. I know Nirmalia has joined Tata's. So these are all steps in the right direction to bring good talent from outside. And we should be doing more of that. And maybe companies can get engaged in the process of feeding the education system. Anyway, I'll stop there because this is some measure of citations. Let me just give you a little story. At Penn State, we had a senior faculty member from India come and give a talk in our physics department. And I went there because I was helping with the India relationship. And there's a very top professor of Indian origin on our faculty, Abhay Ashtekar, who some people say he will get a Nobel Prize someday. So he was there at the talk. So I asked him after the talk, what did you think of this talk? He said, the good news is he was very scientific, he presented everything very well. The bad news is it's all 20th century science. This is all, there's nothing new here. And I think that leap from imitative knowledge to innovative knowledge is very important, because the economy cannot be just imitative economy. It has to be, a lot of speakers today spoke about the innovation part of the economy. To get that, you need to be at the leading edge of the field. And to get there, it's very expensive. And I hope my suggestion, for whatever it's worth, is something people will take into account. But all the things I got were often pushbacks. But hopefully somebody, I was hoping maybe Sashi Tharoor might have stayed for the talk, and maybe he could have done something. Anyway, thank you, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to address.